All right, folks, I think we're about to get ready to start. So just before we kick off, I just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. This webinar will focus on the travel restrictions between Ireland and the United States during the time of COVID-19. Just before we begin, there are a couple of housekeeping details that I want to run through with everyone. This webinar will run from 6:30 p.m. till 7:30 p.m. Central Time. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on ICS's YouTube channel for those who would like to refer back to it at a later time. Additionally, we will be sending up a follow-up email to all registrants that will contain the link to the recording, the PowerPoint presentation, and resources discussed in this webinar, as well as a short survey. This webinar is intended for informational purposes only. This does not constitute as legal advice or counselor assistance. We will not be fielding questions from the audience during this presentations and cannot answer direct circumstantial inquiries, such as travel dates, etc. We did receive some questions ahead of time from those who registered through Zoom. We've shared these questions with the presenters and they may choose to address them or not. Topics were agreed upon by the presenters and common themes of inquiry were identified and incorporated into today's presentation. It is important to note that this webinar is current as of July 1st, 2021, and rules and regulations can change at any time as the public health situation unfolds in the multiple jurisdictions discussed. We encourage all travelers to frequently check the most up-to-date travel information from a reliable resource prior and during your trip. Following the presentation from our four speakers, we will display a series of links and resources on the screen that you should save and check frequently before your travel date. And this leads us to our introduction of our four speakers this evening. We are privileged to have four expert panelists joining us today. To start, we will hear from Fiona McEntee, who is the principal attorney at the McEntee Law Group, an immigration-focused law firm based in Chicago. Fiona will discuss travel to the United States for Irish and UK citizens, returning considerations for US visa holders, and CDC travel requirements for travelers returning to the USA. We'll then hear from Kevin Byrne, Consul General of Ireland to Chicago and the Midwestern United States, and Claire McCarthy, Consul General of Ireland to Austin, Texas, and the South Central United States. Kevin and Claire will discuss travel to Ireland requirements, local restrictions, COVID-19 testing requirements, a public health update for Ireland, and provide an overview of the new online Irish passport application process. Finally, we'll hear from Eamonn McConville, who is the Deputy Director of the Northern Ireland Bureau based in Washington, D.C. Eamonn will discuss travel to Northern Ireland requirements, travel to Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK and the Republic of Ireland, local restrictions, COVID-19 testing requirements, and provide a public health update from Northern Ireland. Following each speaker's presentation, we'll provide an opportunity for closing remarks and any necessary clarifications. We'll also display the contact information for all four organizations presented on this panel to briefly discuss, and then we will briefly discuss program offerings from Irish Community Services. We'll finally conclude with a short video which may remind everybody of the Emerald Isle. But without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker of the evening, Fiona McEntee.
Thank you so much, Mike. Hi, everybody. It's great to see such interest in this topic. I know we have a lot of people registered tonight. This is in webinar format, so obviously I can't see everybody, but hopefully you guys can see me and I think more importantly, hear me. Mike kind of gave a great overview of what to expect from this evening, and I'm really honored to be here with such incredible panelists. To be honest, I wish the topic was something a little bit lighter. I wish that the travel bans and all the travel restrictions were long behind us, but unfortunately, that's not the case. I'm going to kind of go through, I'm a US immigration attorney. I am from Dublin originally. I'm a naturalized US citizen, but I've been practicing as an immigration lawyer in the US for close to 14 years. So for my career exclusively, I've practiced US immigration law. I think, the first thing I kind of want to say is that I totally know how it feels to be separated from family and to be dealing with these restrictions. I would say, every day I do consultations with people who are directly impacted by them in really tough circumstances. And so I just want people to know that, we understand the impact of these restrictions, and we really are trying our best to not only to advise people under extremely tough circumstances, but also as important, I think, is to advocate for changes to policies that will make things easier for everybody. I am the chair of the Media and Advocacy Committee for AILA, which is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So that's the National Bar Association that has about 15,000 immigration lawyer members. And we're a very well respected group and have a lot of authority in relation to immigration advice and policy. One thing that AILA just released earlier on this week is a very, very detailed policy brief with recommendations to the administration in relation to some of these travel bans and restrictions and really general kind of just the impact that the pandemic has had on the Department of State. So I will provide a link to Mike and to Irish Community Services and that they can share them. I think it's worthwhile reading them. There's some of it is legal heavy and it contains provisions of the law that we think the administration could use to make things easier for people. And I'll get into kind of some of those, but you can read it and kind of see the types of things that we're advocating for. There are other ways that people can take action as well. AILA, our Bar Association, has developed a specific take action that anybody can fill in. Again, I'll provide the link to Mike and to Irish Community Services that they can share around. So because I know sometimes it feels like you're just frustrated and you're shouting into the void and there's nothing you can do. And maybe by reading these and taking action, you're exercising your voice in that way. And collectively it is important and there is strength in numbers. And we've seen that throughout many different immigration policies. So just to know basically that there's a huge amount of people that are advocating for change. And one of the first changes that we want to see is that the administration should immediately rescind these travel bans that are blanket bans on immigration and on immigrants coming into the US. They are not reflective of the kind of science-based approach that we would like to see. We recognize it's a global pandemic, but there are science-based things that can be done with testing and quarantine and other types of things that can be done to ensure a safe return to travel. Because these bans are impacting visa holders who have been here for a long time and have been living here and cannot travel overseas and come back. And we've had people whose parents are going through cancer treatments. We've had people have to watch their parents' funerals through Zoom because of these travel bans, because if they leave and go into Ireland, then they'll be banned from coming back in, or they'll be subject to this travel ban. So a brief overview of what this travel ban is for those who are not familiar with it. It's been in place since last March. And essentially, it is a regional-based COVID ban. It's for people who are in one of those travel ban countries. So the UK, obviously Ireland, Northern Ireland, the UK collectively, and Schengen. There's lots of different countries that are subjected to it. But for purposes of tonight, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the rest of the UK. It is not a nationality-based ban. So it is a regional ban based on where you have been prior to coming into the US. It does not apply to everybody. There are exceptions to it straight off the bat, whether if you're a US citizen, if you are a green card holder, if you are a spouse of a US citizen, if you have a minor US citizen child, the ban might not apply to you. If you're in that situation, what you'd need to travel, you need evidence of your relationship to the US citizen, marriage certificate, birth certificate. If you are subject to the ban, if you don't fall under those limited exceptions, are you eligible to get what's known as a national interest exception waiver? Well, that depends on the specifics, You need to kind of look at like what visa are you trying to enter in on? Do you actually have a visa in your passport? What's the purpose of your trip? Where are you located? Because all of these things will dictate the procedure that we have to follow to try to get an exemption for you. If you're in the Republic, if you're in the South, we're going to be looking for this through the US Embassy in Dublin. There's certain very specific parameters of this. You know, there's been, if you're a student, you might be automatically given an NIE waiver. If you're coming into the phrases to provide vital support for critical infrastructures, and there are 16 identified, then perhaps that's something that we could show. I will say that the embassy in Dublin has been adjudicating these very, very strictly. And so it's something that you really need advice on. And this can be potentially done for people who want to come in on ESTA for a business purpose, if we can show that it meets this. Again, standard is high. It's not going to work for everybody. Another thing I will say is just CDC testing requirements. That's kind of the easy thing to say. Check the CDC website for people over 2. You need to get a test within, I think it's 3 days of arrival, but check this and just to see. That's something you could check pretty easily. But the national interest waiver, the bans, all this kind of stuff is like complicated stuff that really you need very specific advice on if that's your situation. Another thing I just really want to stress, I cannot overstress this. If you're physically in the US and you're contemplating a return, leaving the US, you really need to get advice in relation to your situation. We got a lot of questions coming in about visa renewals. The embassies have really been largely shut down, and that forms part of AILA's policy recommendations as well. Last year, it'll be probably surprising to know, or maybe not, just how drastic an impact the pandemic has had on visa issuance. It's down 80%. Immigrant visas, green card issuance abroad, down 70%. We've all adopted to the Zoom environment that we're working in, and we urge the Department of State to do the same. And so, but if you're here in the US and you're thinking of leaving and you need a new visa stamp, or you need to go to the embassy or even get a waiver, you need to get advice in relation to your situation. I would also say, don't follow what the embassies say and take that as legal advice. An example I'll give in relation to that is that the London embassy, if you look online and look at their guidance, it appears to permit renewals of visas via mail if you meet certain parameters. And we were on a Zoom, obviously we've all been on Zooms, but we were on a Zoom with the visa chief in the embassy last week, and he confirmed, and London confirmed to us when we inquired on a client's behalf, that they're actually not allowing people to renew visas via mail, even though it appears on their website that they are. So if you can take anything away from this, it's to, get legal advice, be very cautious about getting on planes one way or another until you're sure that you're going to be able to come back or to board the plane. Because I think regularly we get people who just show up to airports with tickets and still are not aware of the travel ban. I know it's very tough on grandparents. We're in the same boat in relation to that. But the final thing I will say, because I think I've probably been close to using up my time, but one thing I will say is that working groups, task forces have been established by the administration. The Secretary of Department of Homeland Security attended our conference and confirmed that is true. They are looking at a safe return to travel. But I mean, here we are 16 months later into this, and the people are still banned. Immigrants are still banned unless they're fitting into one of those exceptions. So, we're going to keep the pressure on. We do not know. I'd say the question I get on multiple times a day through all different mediums is, when are the travel bans going to be lifted? We don't know. I think to say anything otherwise is irresponsible. And I have seen it being reported certain dates over the course of the time. And it's just, I don't think it's fair. We don't know is the truth, and nobody knows until it's done. Another thing I would say, if you, I do a lot of social media regular reports. I do a First Friday on my Twitter and on my Instagram, US Visa Lawyer. You can follow us. It's not legal advice, but if there are any updates, I'll post them there, and Irish Community Services as well. So, Mike, hopefully I did okay on time. There's a lot to cover.
Yeah, you did great on time. I just have one more follow-up question.
Okay.
And that being to travel back into the United States from abroad.
Yeah.
Are there CDC health requirements or COVID requirements for returning from abroad?
Yes. So the CDC had instituted a testing requirement there. And so what you should do is I went on, pulled the CDC website. So it's normally, I think it's within 3 days of travel for over 2, you need to get a test or proof of having COVID and recovered from it if you're in that spot. On that note, though, so check the CDC website and just see. We had somebody whose test expired mid-air, and so you just make sure your timing is okay with these testing requirements, because you do not want to find yourself across the Atlantic, or whatever the situation was. Somebody was in transit and either had a waiver or a test or something expired. The waivers, if you're issued them, are usually one entry and used within 30 days of arrival. So timing is key, and it can be, as you know, the flights are long, and if you're coming from maybe not from Ireland where you're going overnight, and so just keep an eye on those tests as well. And so someone's asking about vaccinations. I believe, as far as I know now, I'm not a CDC testing expert. My expertise is immigration law. However, as far as I'm aware, the vaccine, it didn't impact. I think regardless of vaccination status, you needed to show a test. Maybe that will change or not, but that's as far as I am aware. But again, I'm not a expertise on that. But the CDC has, I think, their guidelines are much more clear, I think, than all these waivers and presidential proclamations on travel. So I would direct you to those, because things change as well. The advice I could give you now might have changed, by the time you watch this, if you're watching it on Zoom. So always get current advice in relation to your situation.
Great. Thank you very much, Fiona. And then our next speakers are Claire McCarthy and Kevin Byrne from the Irish Consulate in Chicago and the Irish Consulate in Austin, Texas. So I'll hand it over to Kevin and Claire.
Thanks, Michael. I'm not just stealing the mic. Myself and Claire had agreed that I go first, and then Claire is going to speak next. Firstly, thanks to Mike and Irish Community Services for hosting this event. 130 folks online on a beautiful Thursday evening just shows the level of interest. So thanks for pulling it together. Always great to be on a panel with Fiona. It's my first time in a panel with Claire, which is great, and Eamonn as well. So hopefully we'll get to answer some of your questions. In terms of myself and Claire, how we're going to break it down is, first, I'm just going to give an overview of the health situation in Ireland and the vaccine rollout. Then I'll give a sense of what the restrictions are like in Ireland at the moment, and what some of the rollout or rollback of some of those restrictions might be. I'll say might be because I think a lot of what you're going to hear today, particularly from myself and Claire, is that the situation in Ireland is changing, as many of you've probably seen from the news, and the government has been responsive to the public health situation, which means that certain dates that may have been signalled or flagged are under review or may be changed. So again, I just stress both what Mike and Fiona said around, you may be listening to this in a couple of days' time, but do check the website resources that will be given at the end of the presentation to make sure that everything that you're hearing from us now is indeed current at the time of listening. So just a little bit of context on the Irish health situation. We are in a better place than where we have been. As many of you know, Ireland had a very strict lockdown, and because of that, our mortality numbers for COVID are quite a bit lower than both the US and our nearest neighbour just across the Irish Sea. So there's a real sense of social solidarity there in Ireland around the lockdowns. That said, they've started to open up somewhat because of the strong vaccine rollout in Ireland. In terms of where we are with vaccine rollout, obviously we were quite a bit slower, as most of the EU was in vaccine rollout. We've caught up quite swiftly. So at the moment, 62% of adults in Ireland have one shot, and about 42% of adults in Ireland are fully vaccinated. In terms of vaccine rollout, it's really starting to ramp up now. By the end of 2021, about 15 million doses of vaccine will have been received in Ireland, which is more than enough to inoculate the full population. At the moment, we're doing it on an age-by-age basis. So 30 to 39-year-olds from next week will be able to book themselves a test. And then I suppose the last cohort of adults, 20 to 29-year-olds or 18 to 29-year-olds, will be able to book a test at the end of July, beginning of August. We're rolling out quite a number of vaccines every week, 330,000 vaccines last week, and that number is expected to increase even further as we get more doses of both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine over here. In terms of where COVID is in Ireland at the moment. Obviously, I'm sure many of you have been following the figures in Ireland, and they've come down, vertiginously from the peak that they hit in mid-January, where at a certain point Ireland actually had the highest COVID rate in the world. And that number came down so sharply because of, I suppose, the people adhering to the restrictions and the stay-at-home guidance and mask wearing. There is a number of issues that have arisen in recent weeks, particularly around this new Delta variant, the variant of concern. And it's been seen as, a matter of real concern in Ireland. And the reason for that is the virulence of the Delta strain. I'm sure many of you have probably seen the reports about it, but just to give you an update on those, it's about 60% more transmissible than the Kent strain, which is the strain that entered Ireland just over the Christmas period and saw our numbers go from about 200 cases a day to being one of the highest in the world. So because of that, there's real caution now around the possibility of the Delta variant becoming much more prevalent. And indeed, it is becoming much more prevalent. So mid-June, the Delta variant was about 9% of new cases in Ireland. The following week, it was 28% of new cases in Ireland. End of last week, it was 55% of cases of new cases in Ireland. And just at the start of this week, it was 70% of cases in Ireland. And we really expect it to become, by far the most prevalent strain in Ireland in the coming week or weeks. Because of that, there's been a rolling back somewhat of the pace of opening in Ireland. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a little bit, but just to give some context around why that decision was taken to slightly slow or roll back. Ireland is looking to both international guidance and international experience around COVID, and one of the examples we're looking to is Scotland, and they had about 200 cases a day 6 or 7 weeks ago. And they had 4,200 cases 2 days ago. And that's again because the Delta variant has become the dominant variant in Scotland. In Ireland, we're at about 450 cases a day. And we do expect, Tony Holohan, the Chief Medical Officer, did say that we expect to have another wave, another high wave of COVID infections because of this new Delta variant. In terms of where Ireland is at the moment in our reopening, we've done away with phases. It used to be phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've done away with the term phases, but where we are at the moment, and this is as of the 29th of June, for those of you that do go to Ireland, mask wearing, face coverings are mandatory in retail outlets, banks, credit unions, post offices, taxis, bus and rail, public transport. And for those workers in public-facing roles. So I suppose the message there would be, if you're going to Ireland, bring your masks with you. You'll see a lot of folks with their masks still on, and indeed it's mandatory in certain locations. In terms of accommodation services, hotels, B&Bs, guest houses, hostels, they have reopened. Services, including certain facilities, aren't just open yet, but if you're staying in a hotel, you can eat indoors in their restaurant. That's not the case for folks that aren't staying in hotels or guest houses. In terms of travel within Ireland was quite restricted. At one period, it was restricted within a couple of kilometres from your home. Then it was within your county. That's now been done away with. So inter-county travel is fully possible. It's reopened. There's been an increase in numbers of people that can use public transport. We're up to about 50% of normal capacity on public transport. Galleries, museums, cultural attractions have mostly reopened. But if you are going to Ireland, I suppose our guidance and advice would always be to check with the institution you plan to attend to make sure that they are indeed open, and also to see if they have any particular restrictions around either numbers or access. Cinemas and theatres have reopened again. There are capacity limitations there, so do check. In terms of certain pieces that were to roll out and now will not be rolling out, on the 5th of July, there was to be a resumption of indoor activities in bars and restaurants, so indoor dining and indoor, getting pints in pubs was possible indoors, or was going to be possible from the 5th of July. That is now no longer the case. That has been reviewed as a result of the increase in numbers of the Delta variant in Ireland. And now they're looking at the 19th of July when they will announce what the next phase will be. So government is fully conscious that that's a difficult blow for many folks that work in the hospitality sector. But again, decisions have been made following advice from the public health authorities. And really the aim is to try and limit spread and protect the most vulnerable in Ireland. What I would say is, and the web link will come up at the end of the webinar, is do check gov.ie, gov.ie. There's a very clear link there to look at all of the most up-to-date guidance and advice and restrictions around COVID, and that's updated, as and when it needs to be. So that would be, I suppose, my recommendation for a go-to for getting the latest guidance and advice. Now I'll hand over to Claire, who'll speak about travel requirements, testing, and a little bit as well about passports. Thank you.
Gosh, thanks, Kevin. I was hoping you were going to talk about passports, but we can add it in. And thanks so much. Thanks so much to the team in Irish Community Services for organising this webinar. I'm Claire McCarthy. I'm the Irish Consul General based in Austin, Texas, but responsible for this whole area around the southern central United States. And I'm delighted to be with you all this evening. Absolutely thrilled to see the number of participants that we have on the call, which I think is reflective really of that desire and need that we all have at this stage to get to Ireland and to get to visit Ireland. And while there are certainly some obstacles in our way at the moment, what I can say without any hesitation is that when the time is right and when it is safe to do so, you are going to get such an incredible welcome when you do get to Ireland, and when we have all put all of this behind us, I suppose, to a certain degree. What I'm going to take you through a little bit is around the travel requirements to actually get to Ireland, what's actually required at the moment. And now I know some of you are probably hoping that I brought my crystal ball and I'm going to look into the future and tell us all what's going to be required in August or September. Unfortunately, my crystal ball isn't working very well at the moment, but I'm going to do my very best to give you the information that's current and also how to make sure that you are best equipped with the right information that you need when the time is right for you. Because as Fiona and Kevin and definitely Eamonn will say right after me, everything changes so much. So we just have to be okay with that and to be okay with changing our plans and being flexible when we are required to do so. So I'm actually going to start with PCR tests and the testing regime. And I'm starting there because that's one of those essential building blocks that you need in terms of travel at the moment. And so it kind of makes sense just to clear up some of the questions that you've submitted around testing and what's required. So, and I've been trying to practice my pronunciation on this one now, so I hope I get it right. But passengers who intend to travel to Ireland or who need to travel to Ireland are required to have a negative or a not detected result from a pre-departure COVID test, but it's a very specific type of test. What in shorthand we call the RT-PCR test, and what in longhand is the, I have to read this, apologies, reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test. I'm not a scientist, so don't ask me to explain what that actually means. But what I do know is that they will not let you on the plane if you do not have the correct pre-departure test taken within 72 hours of your planned arrival time in Ireland. That is the only type of test that's acceptable, and it has to be within the 72 hours of arrival. So you have to plan ahead, and you have to plan to make sure that you're going to have the result on time, because depending on where you are, the result can take up to 48 hours to come through. And word of warning, if you're traveling on a Monday, beware the Sunday closures, because a test that's taken on a Saturday might delay your test result, so plan ahead is the key message, and be sure to factor any Sunday closures into your testing window planning. So you have to present that evidence of the negative or the not detected result to board a plane to go to Ireland from the United States at the moment. And you'll also be asked to show it again when you arrive at the immigration control points at the entry point to the state that you arrive in. And we've had lots of questions about children, if you're traveling with children. Children who are aged 6 and under do not require a PCR test, an RT-PCR test. So 6 and under, not required. Everybody else, you have to have the test. When you arrive in Ireland, and I'll be coming to that again, there'll be more testing, but let's come to that in terms of the actual arrival into the state, because it might make more sense at that stage. Okay, so the main event, as it were, the requirements for traveling to Ireland from the United States. So I'm going to run through what the current requirements are, and then, like I said, try and polish the crystal ball a little bit and see what we can tell you about what we expect to come. The current government advice is still to avoid non-essential international travel, okay? And we have to restate that. That is what our government is advising at the moment. That said, if it is required for you to travel to Ireland at the moment, I essentially break it down into 4 steps because I need things to be easy for myself to understand. So that's how I break it down. There's 4 steps that you have to do. Firstly, you have to complete a COVID-19 passenger locator form. That's available online. It's very easy to complete. You have to have evidence of your negative or not detected result from your RT-PCR test. No more than 72 hours before you arrive into Ireland, that test has to be taken. When you arrive, you then have to self-quarantine for a period of 14 days at the address that's on the form that you completed. That's number 3. And then when you're in Ireland, after 5 days, you can go and get another COVID test. And if you have a negative result from that COVID test, you can end your self-quarantine period early once you have the result from that test. So 4 things again. You have to complete the passenger locator form. You have to have the negative or not detected COVID test taken within 72 hours of arrival. You have to then self-quarantine or plan to self-quarantine for 14 days, but you can take another COVID test after spending 5 nights in the state. You can take another COVID test. And if that one is negative, life may resume. That test that you take in Ireland is paid for by the state. You can book it in advance online before you travel to Ireland. There's a very easy way. It's gov.ie/test. It's really simple, gov.ie/test. And if you go on there, you'll be able to book that test, and it's paid for by the state. You don't have to pay for it again, because we know that these tests are very expensive and a significant additional burden. Again, a reminder, we have lots of questions about children. So children aged 6 and younger do not require their PCR test for travel. But everyone in the family, everyone in that unit that's traveling together will be required to self-quarantine at the address that you've provided on the passenger locator form. We had a question about, do you have to be vaccinated to travel to Ireland? And at the moment, the vaccination is not currently required, but obviously it is strongly encouraged, especially with the growing concerns around the Delta variant that Kevin was just talking about. Now, I'm going to move on to the future requirements, because I think this is what everybody is looking into or hoping to learn more about. And you probably did read in the media or through the official sources of information that the government is certainly wants to move towards a situation where these restrictions will no longer be in place in terms of travel. So what do we know is going to happen? We know that from the 19th of July, subject to the health situation in Ireland at the time, but the intention is from the 19th of July that Ireland will join the EU Digital COVID Certificate program. And that's about people who are traveling within the EU, and it's about people who got their vaccinations within the EU. The intention is certainly to try and broaden this out to passengers who are going to be traveling from the United States in terms of the elimination of the restrictions or the on getting to Ireland, such as the pre-departure testing and the quarantine on arrival for vaccinated passengers. But we can't give you any firm information on that right now. What I can tell you for sure is, as soon as the government have announced how it's going to be implemented. All of our respective websites will be updated, social media will be updated. So if you take a note of the websites that Irish Community Services are sharing on this webinar and check back in those in the coming days and weeks, you will get the information that you need. Really, really important though, that you check it again and again as you get closer to your proposed travel date, because it might change again and again and again. And we've seen that over the last year or two, and this is the flexibility that we all need to adapt. We had some questions about the COVID digital certificate that the EU is going to be implementing, and whether or not Irish people or American citizens here will be able to participate in that. At the moment, I don't think so. It's about people who were vaccinated within the EU. And if there's any change to that, again, we will put that on our website. But at the moment, it is only about individuals who've been vaccinated within the European Union. That's what the system is compatible to administer certificates for. So, like I said, the intention was that all of this was going to change on the 19th of July, subject to the health situation at the time, but we can't guarantee that until the government formally announce it. If everything goes to plan, it would mean that vaccinated passengers would not require the pre-departure testing or the self-quarantine on arrival. But as soon as we have any confirmation of that, we will publicize it and you will be able to know for sure. The key question, and lots of people asked this in the pre-webinar questions, was what will be the evidence? How will they know that I've been vaccinated? And the answer is it's your CDC vaccination card right now. So keep that card really safe. Mine is now in a special little plastic pocket inside in my passport to keep it clean. And I suggest you do the same. Just keep it really safe and keep it with your passport. And whatever you do, take a photograph of it as well so that you have it on your phone as well, just in case, you know. Belt and braces approach, I think, is what's going to be required. Now, we had a couple of questions also about mandatory hotel quarantine, which sounds like a scary enough thing. The mandatory hotel quarantine only applies in Ireland if you arrive or if you travel via one of the countries that is termed a designated state. Okay, so the designated states are listed on all of you'll find them easily on the internet, but the people who are coming from the designated states, they have to pre-book and prepay for their place in these designated hotels, which is, it's like organized quarantine, so that you're escorted from the airport to your place of quarantine. But it hasn't applied to the United States since like the end of May. So at this point in time, mandatory hotel quarantine does not apply to passengers arriving from the United States. And we certainly all hope that that will continue to be the case. One last thing I'm going to mention, Kevin, if that's all right, if I'm not going into your time, is just we did have a question in the from the pre-webinar questions about traveling to Ireland from the UK. Now, if I thought trying to say the RT-PCR was difficult out loud, trying to explain the traveling from the UK requirements is also pretty complicated. The best advice I can give you is to check online. I am going to explain it very, very briefly because someone asked the question, but it is complicated and it's best to check it online. Basically, it's kind of like the 4 steps we talked about earlier, but with one additional one. So if you're traveling from the UK, you have to complete the passenger locator form. You have to have your pre-departure negative or not detected COVID test. You have to self-quarantine at the address that you have indicated on your passenger locator form. And this is where it gets slightly different. If you're a vaccinated person traveling from the UK, you can have your test after 5 days. And if it is negative, not detected, you can end your self-quarantine early at that stage. If you are not vaccinated and you are traveling from the UK, you have to wait a further 5 days. So you cannot end your self-quarantine until after a further 5 days in Ireland. And again, subject to another negative test. So that sounds complicated because it is. So if anybody is planning on spending some time in the UK, and then coming to Ireland, really do need to get to grips with all of the different requirements before you travel. And just because we haven't said this often enough, all of this can change. So you need to check the websites and check reliable sources of information before you travel. And certainly, the Irish consulates across the United States, Kevin's team in Chicago, or us down here in Austin, we are happy to try and help people as best we can, but we are not responsible for your travel arrangements. So you have to really take that personal responsibility about making sure that you're well informed, that you're prepared, and also that you're ready to change your plans if necessary, if the requirements change. And that's a pretty important point. So Kevin, I'm going back to you because you were going to say something really fascinating about passports. It's good news, I think, right?
Yeah, it's good news. So because it's good news, I'll be extremely brief. Passports are now available online. Sorry, I should rephrase that. You can now apply for your passport online. Before, you used to have to send us an email or a phone call or a letter, and we would send you out a passport form, which you would then send back. Now it's all available online through an online system. It's much faster. And we have started to roll that out, and we will be sharing more information on our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those places as well. It's already up on our website. So if you are going for either a first-time passport or a renewal, it's now all online. So please check our websites there, and hopefully it'll help you get your passport a bit more swiftly than through the old paper-based method. There were just a few quick questions I might just touch on because I know that you're keen to hear from Eamonn. Is the Irish government, making the case for the travel ban to be removed? Yes, the government's extremely sensitive to the importance of the US-Ireland relationship, the number of Irish families that are split with parents in one place, grandparents elsewhere. It's something that we're extremely conscious of, and it's been raised at all levels frequently. And indeed, it's been raised, I think, by most countries as well, but Ireland particularly so. So yes, it most definitely is. There was a quick question on Claire was on, does a 5-year-old need a test after a family goes into quarantine? No, my understanding is no. Under 6, no need for testing at all. So that's just that. But I shall end it now. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Eamonn and Claire, Kevin and Claire. And now we will hand it over to Eamonn McConville from the Northern Ireland Bureau. Welcome, Eamonn.
Thanks very much, Michael, and good evening, everybody. Michael, I think I'll start just by clarifying that the Northern Ireland Bureau doesn't provide consular services. So just if anybody's inquiring about passports or anything like that, you should contact your nearest British or Irish embassy. A lot of what I'm going to say, I think, will sound a bit like Groundhog Day. I'll just be repeating a lot of the stuff that Claire and Kevin said, but with some important differences. I again will stress that that all of the information that we're going to talk about tonight is available on the various websites, and for Northern Ireland, it's nidirect.gov.uk. And it is important, as both Claire and Kevin have said, to check regularly because it does change periodically and even in response to changing circumstances on the ground. The latest review in Northern Ireland was today, and the changes that will happen as a result of that will take effect from Monday. So I say that just to emphasize the case of how important it is to check back regularly. I've had a look at the questions that were submitted before tonight's event, and I think I'm going to be able to cover the vast majority of those by stepping through the process for someone travelling to Northern Ireland using either a British or an Irish passport and travelling via Dublin Airport or one of the London airports. So hopefully, Agnes Gowdy, if you listen in, I'll be answering your question as I go through my remarks here. So for your journey to Northern Ireland, there are some essential things that you must do. So you must provide proof of a negative COVID test result taken up to 3 days before departure. You must book your post-arrival testing, and that's the test that you will do on day 2 and day 8 of your 10 days of self-isolation when you get to Northern Ireland. You must complete a UK passenger locator form 48 hours before arrival, and I'll touch on that a wee bit later on. And also, if you're travelling via Dublin Airport, you must also complete the relevant parts of the Irish passenger locator form. So that's very important. And then, as I say, when you arrive in Northern Ireland, you must self-isolate for 10 days. So the pre-departure testing, all of the science that Claire mentioned, that is the same science, but there are some particular differences for Northern Ireland. So everyone 11 years old and over must take this test in the 3 days before you depart. And the information that's required to be displayed on the test result is set out on the NI Direct website. But one thing that I just want to point out in particular is that the name on your test result must be the same as the name on your travel documents. So that's very important. When you get to the airport, you can provide your test result either as a printed copy or on your phone as an email or a text. So again, just as a point to note, I'd strongly advise you to have your phone fully charged before you set off on your travels. And needless to say, if that result comes back as a positive result, then you simply must not travel. Then in terms of the post-arrival testing, so you must book these before you set off on your travels. And as I said, those are the tests that you will take on day 2 and day 8 of your self-isolation period in Northern Ireland. Children under 5 do not need to take these tests, so that's important as well. And links to where you can book these tests are available on a NI Direct website, along with some very good instructions. The reason you have to book them in advance is that your booking confirmation number is required on your passenger locator form. So that's just something to note as well. The passenger locator form, you must complete a UK passenger locator form 48 hours before arriving. Now that arriving is whether you arrive into, for purposes of our examples today, Dublin Airport or one of the London airports. So if you arrive into an airport anywhere in the Republic of Ireland, in England or Wales, you can then continue your journey to the address in Northern Ireland where you will self-isolate, the address that you've specified on your passenger locator form. One thing to note, though, is currently if you travel to Northern Ireland via Scotland, you actually have to complete your isolation in Scotland before you can then travel on to Northern Ireland. And again, details of all of that are on the NI Direct website. So then in terms of self-isolation, you've got to your address in Northern Ireland, and you must self-isolate there for a full 10 days. If you get a positive result to one of your tests during that self-isolation period, you must add a further 10 days to that isolation. But if you get to the end of the 10 days and you haven't had a positive result and you're not displaying any COVID-19 symptoms, then you're free to leave self-isolation and move about in Northern Ireland within the restrictions that apply at that time. There are a limited number of reasons that you can leave the 10 days of self-isolation, and those are set out on the NI Direct website, but they are things like for emergency medical attention or if you're in danger and things like that. Another thing just to note is that the test to release, the release early scheme that's available in England and Ireland is not available in Northern Ireland, so you must complete your full 10 days. So I think that, Michael, it covers really the travelling to Northern Ireland and getting to the stage of beyond self-isolation period. So I just want to go through some of the information in relation to the COVID restrictions in Northern Ireland and latest updates, and maybe answer a couple of the specific questions that came up in the questions before the event. So there's been a tremendous effort by the whole of the Northern Ireland executive, and particularly the Department of Health and the entire public health system in Northern Ireland in response to the pandemic, and indeed the general public has responded really well to the restrictions that have been in place now for some time. But we're at a place now where we've just reached over 2 million vaccine doses having been administered, and that equates to 80% of the adult population receiving their first dose, and around 60% of the adult population now having had their both doses and fully vaccinated. So that's a tremendous position. It has allowed a gradual easing of restrictions, but with a continued emphasis on following health advice closely. So just to mention a couple of things in particular that people had asked about. Face coverings are required in shops, public transport, and all indoor settings such as churches and banks, etc. Anyone who can work from home is encouraged to continue doing so. Accommodation and hospitality has opened up, but with certain restrictions, including the requirement to collect customer details for track and tracing if required. Hospitals and other care facilities are taking a very phased approach to visiting. So if you have completed your 10 days of self-isolation and you wish to visit somebody in a hospital or care home, it's important that you check with the facility first as to what their specific requirements are. Weddings and civil partnership ceremonies are permitted with certain restrictions again, including a risk assessment that needs to be carried out by the venue around numbers attending. And then in Northern Ireland, the vaccine centres are now open to anyone over 18 years of age by appointment, and more recently, and in some way in a response to the occurrence of the dining and walk-in clinics have opened up in certain areas as a way of encouraging take-up of the vaccines. Finally, just to mention that the Department of Health have announced a vaccine certification service which will be introduced in Northern Ireland shortly, subject to certain checks. And that will allow people in Northern Ireland to prove that they are fully vaccinated when travelling abroad. So, Michael, I think that has probably covered the questions and the travel from US to Northern Ireland. So I'll hand back to you now.
Great. Thank you, Eamonn, Fiona, Claire, and Kevin for providing all of that very useful information. I know, at least at ICS, we've been receiving quite a few inquiries about folks wanting to travel to the United States, to Ireland, and to Northern Ireland. So we really appreciate all of you being on today. I'll just leave it open for if any of the panelists have any last minute kind of clarifications or closing remarks that you guys would like to say. If not, we'll move on to the resources. But yeah, Fiona, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump. One thing I didn't mention was, which we get asked about all the time, is people going to a third country to quarantine in from before entering the US. So as I mentioned, these travel bans are regional based on being in Ireland or one of the banned countries. So some people are going to Mexico or other countries and then staying there for over 14 plus days and then attempting to enter the US from there. you know, that plan is, it's not like you're getting around or doing a loophole. Like, it's a regional ban, and if you've been out of Ireland for 14 plus days, then the ban doesn't apply to you anymore. So you're not doing anything underhanded or anything. But if that is something you're considering, you do need to get advice about that, because you need to, if you're going to kind of take the investment and go somewhere and like stay there for so long, you need to figure out that plan ahead of time, and just know it's not guaranteed, but just discuss that with somebody so you have you know, an idea of what you're going to do. So just wanted to mention that if you are subject to the travel ban and you can't get a waiver and you're considering that, it is potentially an option, but would need to be fully, you know, kind of considered ahead of time.
Great, thank you very much. And Claire,
I just wanted to add, and we know that there have been difficulties with some people taking rapid COVID tests that then don't meet the requirements, and then they are turned away by the airline or whatever at the airport. So really, really reassure yourself that the tests that you're taking meets the requirements that you need for the flight that you're taking, and that the certificate or the printout of the results that you will get will meet the requirements, because when you're at the airport, it's too late to get it fixed then to get on the flight. And then the other thing that I probably should have said a bit more clearly is just that, you know, for lots of the things that we've talked about, there can be exemptions for very small categories of people or circumstances. And we didn't go into those deliberately on this webinar, because they really only impact a very, very small number of people. But, you know, so if you think that an exemption applies to you for something, again, check it with us or check it with a reliable source of information. But we very much addressed the vast majority of people in the comments that we were making today.
Great. Thank you all once again. And then we will, let me do a screen share here. Let's do, yeah. So these are our lovely speakers. And let me see. Yes, this is it. So a lot of the links that the speakers on today's webinar had been referring to are displayed here on your screen. I will emphasize that some of the exact URLs are a little bit longer. So these are kind of the generic government websites that you can obviously find information on travel to, you know, travel to the Republic of Ireland, travel to Northern Ireland, and the Department of State travel guidelines. We will be in our follow-up email providing the exact links. So that might be, you know, stay tuned if you have registered for this via Zoom. You know, we do have your email address, and you will be receiving the full URL for the COVID-specific pages within the government websites displayed here on screen. I also wanted to provide the contact details of the 4 organizations represented here, or at least their websites. So the Consulate General of Ireland in Austin, Texas, the Consulate General of Ireland in Chicago, the Northern Irish Bureau, and the McEntee Law Group. And then we will, and again, all of this will be in the follow-up email that will be provided to the registrants post the event. And then we just wanted to provide a little bit of an update on the services that we provide here at Irish Community Services in specific relation to our immigration and naturalization services. So Erdan, I believe if you're on the line, that you were going to speak a little bit to the U.S. Citizenship Services.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And thank you for all the panelists. I think all the information was so useful. Many questions we had about the national interest waiver, children, how to get the passport online. So thank you all the panelists. I think you were extremely clear. And I just want to take 2 minutes explaining one of the programs that we so proudly serve at Irish Community Services, and it's naturalization services. So if you are a green card holder and you are ready for the next step and you want to become a US citizen, Irish Community Services can help you in that process. We are providing legal consultations, application processing, and also we prepare students to get a successful interview at the naturalization exam, and we also give you all the materials to study and learn the civic history, geography of United States. So if you are one of those green card holders that thinks this is the moment to get the citizenship ready, contact us and we will give you some help with that. Also, I want to say, because all the information that we have, as all the panelists were saying, is changing all the time, please subscribe to our social media, Facebook, YouTube, subscribe on Instagram, so we can provide you the latest news about all these travel restrictions. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Hernan. And then our contact details, again, will be displayed in the follow-up email, also in the very last slide. But before we get to the very last slide with the contact details of Irish Community Services, we thought it would be a nice touch to provide a video that might remind everybody of the Emerald Isle and of home, especially seeing as a lot of people have not been able to make it home in recent times. So this concludes our agenda for this evening's webinar. Thank you again to all of our panelists for providing what is essential information to our community. And thank you all for those who had tuned in. Again, we will be providing a lot of, quite a comprehensive follow-up email that will include a lot of the resources that were discussed in this webinar. Again, will just reiterate that ICS's contact details are displayed on your screen right now. Feel free to contact us directly if you have any specific questions. Otherwise, we will follow up with you by email. But thank you so much for joining, and thank you again to our panelists for taking the time and providing this great service.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.